Hello, my name is Dr. Stephen Critchlow. I'm a consultant psychiatrist. I've also been a church pastor. And in these talks on the topic of suffering, I'm also talking about the power of love to undo suffering and to bring hope and joy and strength into our lives. And of course, one of the ways we do that is in our interactions with other people. And I work a lot with the elderly because I work in old age psychiatry. And of course, the needs of the elderly are very prominent in our society. A large number of our elderly, for example, will live alone. And every day, a general practitioner will see between 1 and 5 people whose main problem is loneliness. A large percentage live alone. And of course, we can think of their needs in terms of food and accommodation and the physical side of life. But obviously, one of the main needs of people is company, friendship. And I've been so staggered by going on some of the medical wards and talking to people and discovering that really people have no real significant relationships in their lives at times. Sometimes their closest relationship is with their cat and their dog, and they feel so terribly lonely. Martin Buber wrote a book, and its theme is I and Thou. In other words, what is our relationship like with another person? You see, so often in the medical sphere, we're tempted to treat people as conditions or to treat people in a way that's not appropriate. That's the temptation. But Martin Buber is saying, actually, we need to have a relationship whereby the other person is extremely important. It's I and thou. It's a kind of sense of the importance of relationship and making sure that we cultivate that relationship with another person. And of course, that will mean that we want to give them time, we want to care for them, but also we want to provide for their social needs, for their friendship needs, for their needs to be validated and understood and cared for. That is what we're meant to be doing as doctors, not just seeing people as people to be moved on to another situation or out of hospital or whatever else it is. That I and thou relationship is very important. And of course, our love for people should guide us in that direction. And I would hope that I would also be going in that direction, although we all have many faults and shortcomings. One story of the Korean War is of a man who was in that situation where the communists came to his village, and in front of his very eyes, this young communist leader shot his only son and killed him. And the time came in that war when actually the tables were turned and the communists began to be overcome. And that very communist leader was brought to this person again. And he was obviously guilty of death because he had killed his only son. But what that man, who was a Christian pastor, did was this. He said, don't kill him. Give him to me. I will look after him. And he brought him up as his own son. And later on, that man, so touched by the love he'd received, himself became a Christian pastor. You see, that is love going to its final extent. And you see, from these stories we've been talking about over these last 3 sessions, we can sometimes understand what we mean by the nature of love. We can tell whether an action is done in love or whether it is not. There's that innate ability within us to be able to tell whether something is love. Of course, we can make mistakes, and sometimes we can misinterpret an action and say that was done in love, whereas in fact there may be other motives. And likewise, we may think of an action, it may not be done in love, but actually a deep sense of love might be there underneath. But usually we can tell whether an action is done in love and kindness or not. And of course, when we look at the nature of God and the nature of Jesus Christ, we can see through Christ that his actions were impelled by love. And if we see actions that don't seem to be done in love, we might ask the question, well, did God really do that? Was that really God behind that? Of course, there'll be questions with that. And sometime later on in this series, I'll hope to deal with some of the difficulties in thinking about God in the Old Testament versus Christ in the New. I personally don't think there's a major difference, but we do need to look sometimes at some of those stories in the Old Testament too. But for the moment, I want you to hold on to the fact that Christ is God. God is seen in the face of Christ. As we look at Christ, we can see perfect love demonstrated. Of course, that demonstration of that love also took Christ to the cross, and we need to think about that more carefully as well. So thank you for listening.